Warning, the following podcast is intended for mature audiences only. Listener discretion is advised. If you are sensitive to any content or subject matter in films, I recommend looking up this film on doesthedogdie.com. It is a user-based database of extensive content warnings for pretty much every film you can think of. It basically gives you a heads up to all the potentially triggering topics a movie might have. Check it out and take care of yourself. Welcome back to We Creeps. I'm your host, Evan Exhumed. And just like before, every week I summarize and review a different horror film for people who are a little too squeamish or easily spooked to watch them, but still really enjoy the plot and often end up looking them up on Wikipedia or Googling the ending explained. We, of course, welcome horror movie fans all the same, whether you're a gorehound or into, quote, elevated, unquote, horror. It doesn't matter, because we're all here to have a good time. Speaking of having a good time, this week we are going to be discussing the 2013 film American Mary. It's defined as a horror thriller drama. It is written and directed by sisters Jen Soska and Sylvia Soska, who I believe are twins, and they actually feature themselves in this film as a pair of twins. So, kind of cool little tidbit there. It stars Catherine Isabel, Julia Maxwell, Antonio Cupo, Tristan Risk, and Paula Lindbergh. Even though I feel like this film does have its problems, including a gratuitous sexual assault scene and not a really great ending, I still really love the concept of, this sort of background underground surgeon who also, as we'll see in the film, seeks revenge in a lot of intense ways. But yeah, I really like this film. I've seen it maybe 3 or 4 times now. I watch it with friends whenever they're looking for something good to put on. And I just really wanted to talk about it because I think that, this film got so close to being perfect. But, there's just a few things that I would have improved on. Without further ado, let's go ahead and get started on American Mary. The film kind of opens up on a little bit of a gross note. The main character, Mary, is a surgeon and she is practicing doing sutures and sewing things up and just surgical, practices on these chickens or these turkeys. So even though it's pretty clear that this is like poultry, it's still really visceral and gross. And right out of the gate, they're just sort of already putting you into sort of this gross mood, which I really do appreciate. We then jump to her lecture hall where we see a Dr. Grant giving a lecture about some medical surgical thing. And Mary gets caught looking at her cell phone and he just kind of, chastises her publicly about that. And, she apologizes afterwards and he's just a complete dick to her about it still. And we can see that one of the reasons that she was looking at her phone was because she had student debt collectors calling her. And we learn that she's still in a severe amount of debt and trying to pay back those loans for medical school / undergraduate, I believe. And so, that sort of adds some of the tension to her life for this character. So needing some money and needing it fast, she decides to look at some sex worker ads on like backpages.com. And she finds a $1,000 offer for what looks to be a dancer at some kind of nightclub. So she goes to the nightclub and it ends up being a strip club and meets the owner of the strip club, who is Billy. And she basically pitches herself and is forced to give him a lap dance. And he asks her for like a massage. But the interview gets cut a little short. One of Billy's goons comes in, panicking. Seems like something happened to one of his employees. And Billy looks at Mary and says, "Hey, do you want to make $5,000? And Mary, being a surgeon who is very poor, well, a student to be a surgeon who is very poor, goes to see what this is about. And apparently his goon or whatever got shot or stabbed. It's not very clear to me. And so she fixes him up. She sews him together, whatever it ends up being. It doesn't really show. But she ends up coming home and is very upset about the whole situation because, it's very stressful. It's very high intense, and this is the first person she's ever worked on. And she just sort of sobs in the shower. And then we see her in her apartment, just sort of scared that this is going to come back to bite her. And she's just cradling a bat and just staring at her front door, hoping that, nobody's going to come looking for her for this. She then gets a couple of phone calls from a woman named Beatrice who refers to her as Dr. Mason. And as we know, Mary is not actually a doctor yet. And so this freaks Mary out and she hangs up. But shortly after that, I guess she had a part-time job or something that was like legitimate. Her boss from that job calls and says, "Hey, I have to let you go. There's just not enough money to keep giving you shifts, blah, blah, blah." So what we're seeing here is that she's getting calls from somebody who thinks that she's a doctor, who wants to pay her for something, and then she also just lost her job. So the desperation that Mary's experiencing is kind of increasing. So suddenly she gets a knock at the door and apparently a package. And as she goes to unlock the door, she turns around for a second to grab something. And then suddenly this Betty Boop looking woman is inside of her home. And by Betty Boop looking, I mean this woman has been surgically altered to look exactly like a human version of Betty Boop. So we learn this woman's name is Beatrice, and she works at Billy's club as a stripper. And she is asking for a friend to get a surgery that she just wants some pieces of skin removed and a few other things. And she offers Mary $2,000 just to show up, just to go to this veterinary clinic where they have all the stuff set up. I guess it's just where she had set everything up. And she says, if you complete the operation, I'll give you an additional $10,000. And, Mary is struggling here. So she's like, well, I can at least get $2,000 just for going. But yeah, so Beatrice is basically trying to help out a friend and find a talented surgeon who can do these sort of extreme body modifications for her, which, I gotta say, I actually really love Beatrice, even though she is clearly mentally unwell. She is probably one of my favorite characters in this whole movie just because she's just so damn sweet. So she makes it to the veterinary clinic where she meets Beatrice, who introduces her to a woman named Ruby Real Girl. And she essentially wants to have her nipples and her vulva as much as possible stitched up. She essentially wants to be a real life Barbie doll. And her reasoning behind this is because she spent so much of her life being ogled at and sexualized. She wants to remove the parts of her that she feels get her objectified and sexualized. And so Mary checks with Beatrice, like, "Hey, does this woman really want this? Are you sure she's right in the head?" And Beatrice is just like, "Oh, yes, of course. Like, she's wanted it for so long. She's been looking for somebody to do it, and I think you'd be perfect for it." So Mary goes with it. She actually performs this surgery on this woman. And, I don't recommend doing this because this is really dangerous, but, Mary's needs that 12K. Oh, and Dr. Grant, the professor that bitched at her, called her for missing a day of class because she was so traumatized from that whole incident. So he's still being a dick during all of this. So that sort of adds a little pressure to her needing to do this surgery. Also, for those who might be curious to watch this after hearing this episode, there is a lot of medical gore in this. So just be aware of that. I think if you're okay with watching like surgical shows, you probably could stomach through this, but it is still pretty gruesome at other parts. So after the surgery is successful, Mary immediately goes to the bathroom and vomits because anxiety or just, she's getting herself into a world that she's risking her medical license or her whole future here. And so we then jump to her doing rounds, which is sort of like the teacher doctor will like ask them questions or ask them to do things to sort of practice being a doctor. So this new doctor named Dr. Walsh, he is one of the teaching surgeons, and he invites her to a party, which I guess is with other doctors and students and stuff. And he's just kind of a little creepy and sus, but she wants to impress him because he says to her, like, "Hey, you're really skilled. You're passing all of these different things. And I think personally that you're going to be a great slasher," which is like a nickname for surgeons. However, just as Mary is leaving, she runs into Beatrice, who is showed up to her school to give her a gift. And Mary's like, "What the fuck are you doing here? I told you not to call." And so Beatrice responds, "Well, you said not to call, so I went ahead and just showed up to your work or your school." which is really funny. But the woman that she performed surgery on was so happy with her that she designed her a dress just for her, which I guess is because she's a fashion designer. So, Mary's flattered with that, but she's also just like, please stay the fuck away from my real life. So Beatrice promptly leaves, and Mary goes home and gets ready for the party. While she's getting ready, she goes to a website where Ruby, the woman who wanted to be a Barbie doll, posted the success pictures after the surgery, and everything looks really great. And the link leads back to a sort of body modification community forum, and Mary sees sort of all the different ways that people body mod, and it kind of freaks her out a little bit, but this is foreshadowing a bit. So Mary ends up going to the party, which seems to be filled with random women and other surgeons and doctors and stuff. And she ends up getting drugged with something in her drink and is sexually assaulted by Dr. Grant, the doctor who was a piece of shit. I feel like the scene was completely unnecessary in terms of how graphic it was. It went on for almost 2 minutes, and it's one of the reasons why I don't feel like this film is quite perfect. And I just did not care for that. So she ends up waking up hours later and leaving the party very disheveled, very upset, traumatized. And the thing that I do love about this movie, though, is that the rapist is going to get his just desserts almost instantly. We see her come home, throw all of her medical books off the table, sort of a symbol for her giving up medical school. And she heads over to Billy's, the nightclub owner, the strip club owner, and says, hey, want to make $5,000? And I think we know where this might be going. We then cut to her putting makeup on and looking in the mirror. And it appears that she hired Billy to kidnap the rapist, Dr. Grant, for her to practice a little surgery on. What she ends up doing and telling him is that she's going to practice all of the body modifications that are most popular in the United States, such as tongue splitting, 3D implants, consensual amputation, things like that. She's going to be doing on him to practice. So we then segue into her now running a sort of body mod clinic in her apartment. And she seems to be doing pretty well at it and getting a name for herself. We see her go through like a few little exchanges, and we also have my new favorite character, who is Lance. He's one of the dudes that Billy hires as kind of the muscle, and he basically becomes her bestie. He's this like kind of quiet, giant, long-haired man, and he just, becomes her new muscle. He's kind of the doorman and security for her body modification clinic that she runs. And he just throughout the movie is just a super big homie. And I'm going to shout him out for sure. At some point, Mary is asked to meet up with a detective who is investigating the disappearance of the surgeon who she is body modding against his will. Apparently, his colleagues are concerned with his whereabouts, and the detective seems to know that he was a sort of sexual deviant and that there were a lot of girls that were abused under his care. So he suspects Mary for sure, but she's like, I don't know where he went, blah, blah, blah. I quit med school, so it doesn't even matter to me. We then cut back to Billy, the club owner. He's sort of just sitting in one of the booths, being his club owner self, and he is watching Beatrice, the Betty Boop girl, do a strip dance, and he begins to fantasize about Mary. Seems like he started to get feelings for Mary. So we watch the lead actress, Catherine Isabel, do a little striptease while Billy is sitting there sort of mesmerized. Mary suddenly shows up and they have a little quick conversation, her kind of giving him the details about how the detective is inquiring, and Billy seems to really want to punish the other surgeons, but Mary's like, no, I don't want to get into that. And so we then see her call to Beatrice on stage, and we see that Beatrice had a project for Mary, and that she is describing as the Sistine Chapel for Mary. And apparently the creators or owners of the biggest body modification website online are interested in getting some work done from her. And so this is where we meet the twins, who are actually the directors and writers of the film. So we snap back to the club where two twins holding hands who have some body modification already walk up to the booth and sit down with Mary. and they are interested in not anything, standard procedure. They're actually interested in getting their arms cut off and then switching them so that no matter what happens, they always have a piece of each other together. So Mary agrees and she goes ahead and does the surgery and succeeds. She also adds some other stuff that they had requested while they're under anyway. And we also see that Billy has kidnapped somebody in a quick little scene and thrown them down some stairs. I'm guessing that's the other doctor. We then snap to Mary in a large warehouse where we see a Dr. Grant, mouth sewn completely shut. He's hanging from like these hooks. It's like something that some people do in body mod communities where you basically pierce your skin, and your skin, if done correctly, is so strong that it should be able to actually hold your full body weight. And some people will just like kind of swing, from their skin like around. So she's done that to him. She's amputated all 4 of his limbs, probably his penis too. I mean, he's just completely fucked up. This is probably the most satisfying and intense way to get revenge on your rapist, and I'm pretty supportive of this. However, a nosy security guard for the premises ends up coming in and surprising her, and he knocks her down and tries to get Dr. Grant from the hooks, but Mary, having her hand forced here, ends up murdering this man. And as Dr. Grant is trying to get away, she tases him. And then we cut back to Billy, who is beating somebody with a plastic bag over their head. I still don't know if that's another doctor, actually, but he gets a phone call from Mary. We then snap back to our friend Ruby Real Girl, and her husband is coming home. And she doesn't seem to have seen him since she got these surgeries done. And he seems pretty fucking upset about it. However, we jump back to Mary at the club with her big homie Lance, the security guard. He didn't know what she wanted for dinner, so he just bought her a little bit of everything, which I'm just like, this is such a sweet man. And so she feels a little bad about, murdering a couple people. And I'm assuming that she murdered Dr. Grant after this. And he just kind of tells her a story about his own past and having to have murdered somebody and, to protect his family and stuff. And she feels a little bit better about it. And that's kind of why I love this character, Lance. I really hope he returns, and I'll talk about that more later. But the main point that he says to her is like, Mary, do not ever devalue what you do or yourself. And so she really takes that to heart, and she moves out of her old place. She ends up getting a giant studio apartment for her new clinic. And we see a few of her customers in like a small little montage that she takes photos of for her website so she can keep doing business and expanding. However, she is greeted at her new apartment by the detective who's investigating the disappearance between Dr. Walsh and Dr. Grant. He tells her that they found some videotapes. Apparently, they both liked to record the sexual assaults that they did. And he's of the mindset that Mary was assaulted and that she might have something to do with the disappearance. And while this is happening, we see that Billy has come across some of those tapes. So I think that we can kind of assume that Dr. Walsh's disappearance is associated with the person he was beating the shit out of. And he actually sees Mary's assault and is pretty upset by that. Shortly after, Mary gets a call from one of her relatives, her Nana, who does come up very shortly earlier in the film, but I didn't mention it because it's not super big. But apparently her Nana has passed away, and she was one of the people who was like rooting for her in her medical school stuff. So she passes away, and Mary is pretty upset about this. So she heads to the club to see Billy, and Billy is getting a blowjob from one of the new girls who is applying to be a stripper there. And that pisses Mary off a little bit. It seems like Mary has gotten a little crush too of Billy. And I think she's out for blood. She wants to hurt somebody because she's just upset and in pain. And she asks Billy, hey, is there anybody you want me to fuck up or torture? And Billy's like, no, I think it's probably fine. And so she confronts him about kidnapping Dr. Walsh, and he kind of owns up to it and is like, I didn't want to make any more trouble for you, but, I was just trying to help. And so she sees the girl walk by who gave the blowjob to Billy. And so she goes into the bathroom and just totally like starts to harass her and threaten her, and just sort of, she's really taking out her frustration on this girl. And she kind of snaps back to reality and sort of apologizes, but not really. So she's kind of, descending into madness a little bit. She's feeling at the edge of her rope. So later, Billy and Mary are now sitting at the bar. Mary is kind of feeling a little melancholy. She asks Billy, "Hey, do you think I'm crazy?" And he's like, "No." And that sort of segues into him telling her that Beatrice quit all of a sudden, just no call, no show, which is pretty weird for Beatrice. So Mary is a little concerned here. Billy also is like, "Hey, maybe we just need to get out of here. Maybe we just need to head to LA together. Just we can leave tomorrow or the next day. You can come with me, get away from everything, and we'll feel a lot better." And she says she'll think about it, and so she then promptly leaves the bar. So she seems like she actually would consider doing that. As Mary is returning home, she gets a call from Beatrice, who we see is totally brutalized, beaten up, limbs possibly broken, just laying on the floor and saying she didn't want to do it, but the man started hurting her, and she gave the location of Mary's apartment to this man, and we learn it is the husband of Ruby Real Girl. Apparently, he was extremely angry about losing access to her body parts and sexualizing her. So he has come to murder Mary. So there's a bit of a struggle between them. Mary ends up getting the upper hand and killing him, but he does successfully stab her. As a result, Mary crawls to the part of her clinic that has all her tools and stuff. She knocks down a table, picks up some stitching and a stitching tool, and begins to stitch herself up by hand. No anesthesia, nothing. She is just putting herself back together after being stabbed pretty hard. Actually, I'm being a little too light here. I mean, she has a cut basically from her sternum all the way down to her stomach. So she's pretty fucked. We then move a little forward and see that the police have somehow been notified of this. I'm assuming Beatrice called them. And the husband of Ruby Real Girl is dead. And we see on the ground, Mary is also presumably dead. She has died due to her wounds. And the detective finds the book that contained all the pictures of the surgeries and torture that she performed on Dr. Grant. And that is basically how the film ends. Really fucking downer ending. I mean, like, you can paint Mary as the villain, I guess, and as a bad person, but Jesus, I mean, she's still the protagonist, and I think everybody watching this, including me, was rooting for her. So that's, I mean, essentially the main reason why I docked this some points, because, not only did we get like a 2-minute rape scene in this, but we also just get a really shitty, abrupt, sad ending. And I'm really, really, really hoping that the good news that I'm about to share makes up for that. The directors and writers, the twins, are actually in the works of creating a television show, American Mary. So I really hope that they don't fucking kill off their main character, because, I mean, this movie is just so fucking cool and interesting to watch. And, aside from the problems that I mentioned earlier, like, I fucking love this movie and would watch it at any time with anyone. So that was American Mary, the 2013 horror thriller drama, written and directed by Jen Soska and Sylvia Soska. I hope you enjoyed this retelling of this film. I hope it inspires you to go see it if you think you can stomach it. It is a little gnarly, but overall, like I said, I really loved it. Thanks again for joining us on We Creeps. I really hope you enjoyed today's episode. Be sure to rate or leave a review if you love the podcast. It helps get other people to know if, it's worth listening to. I think it is. And be sure to follow me on all my socials. I have Tumblr, I have Twitter, I have Instagram. You can find all that at wecreeps.com. You can also find the link to our merch. I have 2 different kinds of t-shirts. I have the Stay Spooky out there. I have the We Creeps logo. And you can get it on mugs or on a t-shirt or, whatever you want, really. So thanks again so much for listening to this week's podcast, and I hope to see you again next week. But the thing that I hope the most, more than anything in the world, is that you don't forget to stay spooky out there.